and explain that and kind of go into some of the problems that might result as these that affect these three changes.
Please do.
Would you like for me to discuss the revocation as well?
Yes, sir.
Yes. The revocation is a really interesting kind of twist in all of these laws or the final regulations. What happens here is that we can, in 2009, an individual who released the exemption, and this doesn't matter if it was a previous year, if it is for a multiple year release, they can unilaterally revoke that release. So let's put that into plain English. Let's say that in 2007, there's a divorce decree, and who was considered the custodial parent released this exemption for every other year for all years forthcoming. Well, in 2009, they can make a revocation, which won't go in effect for 2009. It will go into effect for the taxable year after it. But they can revoke that release. So a kind of a startling change in twist to how the exemptions can be granted and taken away.
What can one do to help minimize their any potential problems with getting this tax exemption?
Well, one of the things with this revocation, and there again, I'm going to explain from my viewpoint, and perhaps the legal side of it maybe you can help me with, but if it could be possible, foreseeable, that an individual could have separate years releases when they're divorced, for example. As a matter of course in getting divorced, they say, okay, we're going to sign a year, several years in ahead of us, but we're going to do a separate one for each year. Now, that could satisfy it and keep away from that multiple year release, but I guess on the legal side of it, my question to you, and maybe I'm putting you on the spot, and I apologize for that, but what would happen later on down the road? Could that be construed as still a multiple year release, even though they were done separately, but they were done at or near the same time?
I think based upon what we have experienced, it would be considered a multiple year release.
Yeah. So, there again, that may not be a way of circumventing that. So the unilateral revocation is an interesting twist to all of this. Some of the other problems that I see are particularly with children in college, and here's one of the things that we haven't talked about or addressed yet, but now for purposes of custody, which for determining the custodial parent for tax purposes, we're speaking in terms of who has the ability to grant the exemption, correct?
Yes.
So what we have in our new definition is that when a child reaches the age of majority, and there again, and let me qualify that, when they reach the age of majority, it kind of depends in that particular year when it happens. But let's say it's the year after, or it's after June 30th. If the child reaches the age of majority, it can very well take away the parent's right to grant that exemption and release it, based upon what I've read in the final regulations. So that could be an interesting scenario where we've got individuals, working off their decree that indicate that, okay, well, they're going to college now, and they're living with me, and or they're not living with them.
Right. In
other words, once they reach the age of majority, where are they considered to be living, or who are they considered to be living with? We know that if they're living away at college, that they're still considered living with that parent. But what if we have a situation where the decree indicates that, well, the mom is the custodial parent, for example, but when they reach the age of majority, they're living with their dad, and they go away to school with the address listed with the dad. What the dad, it would appear, would have the legal right to be the custodial parent and any tax benefits that go along with it.
Right. Now, what about, we've got, when people are tuning in, we're getting some questions. Are there decrees that they currently have in place? Is that paragraph related to the tax exemption, is that now invalid? That would declare who gets to claim each child, or if they alternate years?
Well, see, that's the interesting part about this, is that when you read through the regulations, it seemed to me that they were trying to say in so many words, look, the state court order, the divorce decree can say whatever it wants to, but it cannot foresee what's going to happen in the future. And really, for tax purposes, custodial parent is based upon the facts. And for tax purposes, the facts are, if they are living more nights with one parent than the other, that parent is the custodial parent. So it opens up an interesting paradigm, because so often in the past we, taxpayers, just the regular Joe public, they go by the decrees is stating, well, the wife is allowed to give that to me. Well, that exemption. Well, in our scenario now, if that child is actually living with that parent, and sometimes that happens, the father,
right,
he's basically is the custodial parent. It really doesn't matter. So in effect, it does very well make that invalid. Each year that you file a return now, you have to attach this statement if it was the child's exemption was released to you.
Okay. The statute that you're referring to, is that on your website?
The final regulation is 9408, I believe. Let me make sure I've got that number right. But you can do an internet search. I don't actually have that, but if you do a web search of final regulation 9408, and it'll pull up all the information on it, and there's like about maybe 20, 30 pages. Mm-hmm. And what it does is it goes through, before 2005, the proposed regulations that came into effect January 1st of 2005, and then, which some of this became final, some of it didn't. And the final regulations, of course, came into effect on July, for tax years after July 2nd to 2008.
In your article, you mentioned that maybe keeping a log or a diary might also help potentially minimize any type of problems getting the tax exemption.
Well, I do recommend that, because, what if, for example, we could possibly run into the problem where, you've got both parents working day jobs, but yet one parent has the child registered with their home, but the other parent's the one that keeps them all the time.
Right.
So you could have a situation where the appearance of custodial parent status goes to someone that it shouldn't. So the question is, how do we prove, the counting nights rule, which is not been addressed in the regulations. It addresses, we have a counting nights rule, and it gives you some for instances, but how do you actually go about proving it? I mean, the illusion of proof could very well go to the parent who just has the child registered at their home.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but your website is isntax.com, ISNTAX.com.
Certainly. And any of the listeners, if they'd like, they're welcome to contact me through the website. My email is there, and there's other information to peruse.
Again, this is DadsDivorce.com. Mr. Eisenhart, I appreciate you taking the time and look forward to having you on the show again. And also, thanks for contributing to the website. I know we've received a lot of hits, and it's been extremely informative to our clients who are out there across the country.
Well, thank you, Dan.